I have a story for you today. My parents are from India, from South India, from the southwest tip of India. If India is like that, we're from down here. We're so far south that when people talk about other parts of South India, all of them are north of us. We're at the very, very bottom. And my mother is from a town called Kottayam, which means a fort. And it is a fort. To get to Kottayam from outside, which is how you get there when we come from the airport, you've got to go up the mountains and down back into the valley. And it's protected because it's in the valley. And Kottayam needs to be protected because for thousands of years, it has been at the heart of the spice trade, the silk trade, the rice trade. It's inland, but maybe an hour by car these days, a couple of hours by some other form of transportation in the old days. And it can be traveled by boat as well. There are these series of canals like in Venice, so that you can, waterways, that you can take a boat and come in with cargo, come out with cargo, and with money. And money at the time was gold. So lots of it, piles of it, right? From China and the Far East, going to Rome, stopping in the Middle East along the way. So you could see why you might need a little fort. And Kottayam was the banking center of that part of the trade. So you really need a fort for that. That means all the cash is sitting there. So the story I want to tell you is about a church called St. Mary's in Mannergat. Mannergat is a little town, I guess these days it would be considered a suburb, but a little town next to this town. And of course, St. Mary's is for Mary, Mary the Mother of God, right? Mary, and the image behind the altar is of Mary. She's a little Indian looking in that she has on this really great blue sari. She looks really good in it. She's very light-skinned for this part of India, but her facial features look very much like a woman from that part of India. She looks like one of us. She could be your aunt. And she's wearing this great outfit, and she's got long hair, and it's plaited back. She looks like a local. And she's holding baby Jesus, as you do when you're married. And Jesus is totally one of us. He has a big head of curly, dark hair, right? And I've never seen a Jesus quite like that. But otherwise looks like Jesus you'd find anywhere else. So totally could be your little nephew or child. So this is the church in Mannergat. About a kilometer from it is a temple to Bhagavati, which is a woman deity, so a female deity. So a kilometer is roughly half a mile away. And these are all ancient places. So both the church and the temple are from about 1,000 years ago. And this is documented in that there are memorial tablets that are tombstones that have, the script is from the language that, the way that Malayalam and Tamil would have been written at about 950, 1,000. So unless someone's really good at wanting us to believe that it's from that time, probably from that time. And many of us in those communities have ancestors buried in this place. So here's the story, right? You're in Kottayam, it's a fort. It's a place that is the center of a small kingdom. It is the center of international trade definitely in the time of Jesus, but also before. There are Roman coins from that time and before. So there are all these great stories of war there. So when I was growing up, I just thought we had I don't know what I thought actually. I was growing up in Dallas, Texas, and I didn't know why my mother had so many songs and stories, lullabies, either about fishing and being lost at sea while fishing and war, the people coming to get us. Because that really wasn't my lived reality in Dallas, Texas. But those are the songs that I knew and still sort of know in Malayalam. They're familiar to me. And it's because she's from Kottayam. People fish in the ocean, and it's really risky business, and all the folk songs are about this fishing. It's really charming, and it's some version of, frankly, your father's gone out to fish overnight. We really hope he comes back in the morning. It's really dangerous. And somehow a child is supposed to fall asleep hearing this sung to them, the worries of the mother, right, night after night. So that one I still know a little bit. It's like kind of close your eyes, these are the things happening, is the song. So I know that one. And then these stories of war. So the one that I recall the most clearly is about the temple and the church. My mother's mother's family, so that side of her family, are longtime members of St. Mary's in Mannergat. We have some ancestors that are buried there that have that wonderful old script that says that they died around 1,000 or 1,100 or something like that. Really cool. Like, who gets to know that about their family, right? Especially as an American, frankly. All of us, because of the movements of how this nation has been developed, I think yearn for some story of family and of heritage, of where we're from. We place maybe a higher value on it than many people who are from a place where they know their people have been forever, right? You might even find that boring and would like to get out of that place, right? That's happening all over the world. Often I think we Americans would do a lot to know more and more about a history and to feel rooted in the stories of this planet. So this community definitely does. And it's full of folks that would like to get out of there, frankly. It feels small. It feels like a fort. You feel trapped. You'd like to go somewhere and live a more free and open life where everybody doesn't know your grandmother and isn't in your business all the time, whatever your choices are. So the story my mother would tell is that there was a time when there was a war and people were coming through, invaders were coming through, it wasn't going well, and there were two sisters. And they were fleeing, and they're vulnerable in the ways that women are and children are in times of war. So they decide to run and hide in the temple, that is a holy place. No one goes into a holy place. An armed person wouldn't go in there. That was the rule of the time. And they get there, and the temple is little, it wasn't very large, a very small kind of covering, and there were already people there hiding. So they decide to split up, that one will stay in the temple, the other will run to the church. It's only a kilometer away. And nobody would go into a church that's a holy place. An armed person wouldn't go in. So they do this. And the story that my mother tells is that they're both saved. The invaders do come through. They come through the whole town. And somehow they go through, either they leave or they're pushed out. It's over. When that battle is over, these two sisters are both alive. And because they are both alive, to this day, when the temple does its annual procession of the goddess around Manargat, and when Mary, Nativity comes up in September, and we do our procession as St. Mary's around Manargat, which is not a very big place, frankly, we stop at the temple and at the church from the other community to acknowledge our sister. Now, for the temple, no big deal, right? Bhagavati can have a sister. In the pantheon of Hindu goddesses and gods, no big deal. You can add more. There are many ways to understand all the aspects of God. It's a very flexible sense of the spiritual path. So whatever. She's got a sister named Mary. Who knew, right? Good news for us. And that's literally about the complexity you get in the conversation. I was there last year, and I asked one of the priests at the temple, so who's Mary? And he says, oh, the sister of the goddess here. Completely straight-faced. I couldn't believe it. I'd read about it, but I couldn't believe it. So yay for us. We figured out this other character that no one else knows about. Mary, the sister of Bhagavati. As you can imagine, for the Christians, it's a little more complicated. As far as we know, Mary doesn't have a sister living in India, right? Definitely doesn't have a sister named Bhagavati. Doesn't have a sister we get to worship on her feast day, right? On the day of her nativity. What I love about this story, and my mother, who's a devout Orthodox person, now in the Church of South India, and my extended family, who are all Christians from the Thomas community, so they are Christians first and foremost in their identity and everything else after, is they tell this story as though it makes perfect sense within the world of Christianity. Because it absolutely does for them. Mary and the Devi, and the Devi temple, Devi means goddess, Mary has actually been so absorbed into the culture of that local place that all the ways that we tell the stories fit for them. They can make it work in their own imagination about how the world works, right? That they'll say, oh yes, the Hindus say that they're sisters, but that's probably not right, but who are we to say anything about that? We wouldn't want to cause any offense. There's no reason to cause offense. It's not a fight worth fighting, right? But we wouldn't say that on our side. So when I've asked my family then, why in that procession do we go there? Why, when my grandmother died, did she leave coins as an offering, kind of almost a passage into the next life for the church, but also for the temple? What is this connection? My mother tells the story of these two sisters, fleeing violence and finding in the temple and finding in the church a space that was separate, actual sanctuary from the violence of the world that was inevitable in the world around them. That these two things, these institutions are sisters, and we honor that safety. Now, frankly, if you think about those stories, the story that the Hindus tell makes a lot more sense for why you would do these processions. My mother's story, and my mom is awesome, doesn't actually make much sense at all that you would get elephants and hundreds of thousands of people and go walk over there because 2 little girls were saved 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. Now, if they're sisters, you would get elephants and get a couple 100,000 people and see if you could make that procession work. I think it's really interesting how in every context that we live in, we take the stories of our faith, and frankly, they become part of the culture that we are a part of. We think we bring our faith to the culture and transform it. And we're supposed to try. I think we do try. But there also needs to be for all of us some vigilance about the fact that we are absorbed into the culture, and that can be very, very good. It's one of the gifts of the Episcopal Church for many people, is that we're not afraid of the culture. We're not afraid of the art and the science of the culture, right? We believe God is revealed in it. It is God's ongoing creation. We are not fragile, right? Or in our sense of our identity or of God's identity, right? God cannot be harmed by us. It's one of our great strengths. The weakness is, of course, that God can be absorbed by the culture, right? That God is the God of the culture, that whatever the culture values, in that time, if it were war or whatever else, whatever, in the great banking system that was that place at that time, the power of the elite, God can be the God of that power as well. But often I think we find that God becomes the God of people like those children that are fleeing. That actually becomes the story that many of our communities will tell over time if we allow it to be the case. So I am reminded today that in the Jewish community, today is Purim. So that began last night, it ends at sunset today. And some of my rabbi colleagues have been very persistent in reminding many of us that the kids in Florida at Stoneman Douglas, that school where that horrible shooting happened, are Cuban and Jewish. Now, of course, there must be some other kids there, but that community is known for being Cuban and Jewish. And they keep calling it up. Maybe I think as a call to their own community that this happened to us, to our kids. And you can see that if you're looking at the names, at least by culture, you can see that that's true. I don't know what people's religious practices are. But I've been wondering, as I think about today, what is happening in the Purim services in synagogues in Florida today and last night? What must that be like? Purim is when you tell the story of Esther. Remember that story? She's kind of up there with Mary and the amazing women of the text. Except that Esther, like Mary, you note the remarkable things that she does. Esther becomes a queen, but is just a citizen at a time when her people are subject to empire and are extremely vulnerable. And her uncle says that we are vulnerable, but you might save us. If you are close enough to the halls of power, you might save us. You might be a help to us. And she finds herself there, and it's improbable that she does. And she takes a risk that is a risk of her life, right? It could mean that she dies and nothing happens, nothing good happens. But the line is that she is there and in that place for such a time as this, is why she is standing there. She takes that huge risk, proclaims to the king that there are people out to harm us, and it is untrue what we are accused of. And she succeeds. She saves her people. Can you imagine being a student at Stoneman Douglas and hearing that story yesterday and today? Can you imagine it? I cannot. I'm sure I cannot. I'm sure I cannot imagine those kids already so empowered and so leading of us and so attacked right now, right? So publicly vulnerable, showing us a way forward that some of us might have dreamed of or hoped for, but none of us, I think, could believe we could do anything about. Having already seen some significant change from the persistence of children. Let's not be confused, they're children. These are kids. These are not people that are 20 or more. Children. Some of us have children that age. Children. Insisting that they have a right to safety in their school, that securing their school further is not the way to make them safe, that there are too many guns in their community for them to be safe. They're very clear about it. It's not a lot of hesitance on their part. In some ways shockingly articulate because we as a nation are so inarticulate about this, right? They're shockingly articulate, but actually not. It's actually quite simple what they're saying. But we haven't been allowed to think that simply about this crisis in our nation. Children, young people, like Esther, taking a bold stand in a way that is improbable, that makes them vulnerable, that actually does mean, if you think about how social media and the world works right now, that they could lose everything. Their names are out in public forever. In a nation where it is terrifying to have your name out in public, taking a position on anything at all in this moment. It is a terrifying probability, and there they are, for such a time as this. What I think binds these stories together, one is that they're stories of women, is that Esther, to become the person she was in that place in the court of the king, was absolutely, right? You have to admit, there must have been plenty of people that thought, what a horrible representative of our people. There she is in the court of the king. There she is, right? Living comfortably, drinking the wine of the king's house, doing God knows what, because he demands it, and here we suffer. There must have been no sympathy in that. And in the move that she finally makes that saves them all, nobody would have known it was coming or that she could have done it. Out of nowhere it comes. And she is a great hero now, but like all great heroes, I bet not a great hero until it was all over. Nobody standing with her while she risked everything except her uncle. Maybe, but man, the uncle doesn't play so well in that text either, does he? He asks her to do a lot of things that none of us would ever ask anyone to do. Right? It's a tricky text, which is why I wonder how this sounds to those kids today, who I don't believe are being asked to do anything. I think they are standing up where the rest of us have not figured out how to stand up for them in advance. But I think the story reminds us that often we are only heroes in retrospect, those of us that become heroes. It wasn't very fun to do it while it was happening. But the person who did it knew why they did what they did. And I think in the story of Mary and the Devi, which is one of my favorite stories, which you can probably hear in my voice, it is one of my favorite stories because I cannot make any sense of it. I don't get it. I don't think I ever will. Somehow that community has found in the strength of what they believe, what is a goddess tradition, right? What is the power of women in those communities, in a place where domestic violence is off the charts, where women have very few rights in public life, live in very compromised ways, even though they have very high rates of education and resource and all kinds of other things, are second-class citizens. They have created an order of divinity in which women, in their regular living, in their sacrifice, in their struggle, in their joy, are the face of God in that community. Now, clearly it has not led that community yet to where it should be. Not yet, but I have hope that it might one day. But there is something there, I think, that both of these traditions honor it in these sisters. And I wonder if, like the Esther story, which is so difficult, is so compromised, and yet so glorious in their success. You know, when you do the Purim service, there's all these noisemakers, and you shout at Haman when he finally is dead at the end. It's really rambunctious and fun, because the good guys win. I long for a time when we as a nation might actually agree collectively that the good guys have won, or the forces of good have won, and not because we are operating out of racism or nationalism or fear, but because there was a goodness that we could draw on together and believe that we were free together. And I suspect that the place to find that is in the place of those who flee from violence, those who seek out our places of worship as sanctuary from the evil of the world out there, those who are easy to cast down because they have made choices that seem so compromised over the years, hard to look at, maybe not as good or innocent as us or as we appear to be to one another, that there it might actually be that we see the power of God among us. Amen.